Welcome to the enLIGHTenUP podcast. I am your host, Nicole Frolick, and I invite you to cozy up with me each week as I explore all aspects of the spiritual journey, spiritual biohacking, and expanding the mind beyond this reality. Remember that the collective awakening can start by planting one seed. So thanks for being such an amazing audience and sharing these shows with your family and friends. So without further ado, let's jump right into the episode and find out what we're discovering today. Hey everyone, welcome back to the enLIGHTenUP podcast. I have a returning guest, a very soon returning guest. I have Kozmic Kaela back with me today. For those of you who didn't check out her episode, which I believe was only 2 episodes ago, she's been a spiritual life coach since 2009, and she incorporates astrology, quantum physics, and cognitive chakra work into her private practice. And last time we talked about cancel culture in the spiritual community. And today we're going to talk about the divine feminine rising and goddess energy, and how we both believe that part of it's been hijacked by a darker agenda. Kaela, welcome back. It's been a minute, right?
Long time no see. I love it. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's so good to have you back here. And when we finished recording the last podcast, you reached out to me after and like, oh, but we could have talked about this and we could have talked about that. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll have you back on. And it just so happens that it works out to be perfect timing, like really soon.
It's perfect.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think this is a really important topic to talk about. I've talked a lot about the divine feminine, divine masculine energies on my channel, and the importance of incorporating both, and that we all have the divine feminine masculine energies within us, and that when we have fully and truly remembered who we are and come back into our complete connection at the 0 point with our God source creator, it is because we've come into union through the masculine and feminine energies within self. You know, waking up, I've been awake since my teens, but it's been a progression, right? And I've had peaks and valleys where, like, sometimes I've kind of moved away from my spirituality, and then I kind of go into a really deep awakening again. And my last really deep awakening was summer of 2016. And from that point on, I remember really going in deep and like reading anything I could and watching whatever YouTube channels I could. And there was a lot of talk about the divine feminine energy rising and the goddess energy and all of this. And I liked it in a sense because I was really learning to reconnect with my own divine feminine energy. And I needed to, because I was much more in my masculine energy. But then I started to realize no one's talking about the masculine energy. Why isn't anyone talking about the masculine energy? Like, what was it like for you?
Well, when they talked about the masculine, it was all toxic masculinity, right? So for me, I was really drawn to the inspired creativity of the divine feminine and that permission to be different and tap into what we want our life experience to be. And the masculine is what takes that inspiration and, puts it into action, which will ultimately manifest our reality. And I noticed that a lot of the dialogue would kind of weigh more heavily on the feminine and disregard the masculine as if it's purely toxic and we should just fully be embodied in the feminine, which I do feel we were out of balance and we were finding balance, but a lot of people were really, in my perspective, a lot of people were really connecting in that victimized, wounding, what their experience has been, and rather than taking action to make a difference, they would identify with the white privilege or, just all of this language just started in like 2016, 2017. We have to decolonize. We have to unlearn, like so much deprogramming, which is true, but I almost feel like it was misqualified. It was stripping away our strength, which actually made us even more impressionable, right? And to an agenda, to an ultimate agenda. And so sovereignty is, when we're embodying our masculine or our feminine, we're tapping into our truth and taking in the information and seeing what resonates, or what's a resonance and what's a dissonance. And when we're out of balance and we're fully focused on our wounding and what's wrong with the world and all of that, rather than taking action into making a difference, then this trauma bond happens. And when somebody grows, they're automatically, something's wrong with that person because, well, look at their privilege, or look at, like all these labels started to threaten when people would bring in their masculine and grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. I had a different I see where you're coming with all of that, and I agree to a certain point. That I was definitely very aware of, like, as soon as the toxic masculinity thing came out, I was like, oh boy, like here they are trying to me it was an infiltration on the sacredness of the masculine energy, and the feminine energy as well. And so for me, though, it was more of it wasn't so much a I guess a societal imposition, or the kind of a layering on that I was noticing. I was just noticing more within the spiritual community that we just weren't talking about the masculine energy, or it was just always about the feminine energy, always like that's all we talked about. And I feel like that's done a little bit of damage to the community in many ways, because it's taken us out of balance. Like we were talking
Absolutely.
about this pre-show. And, the only way, like union literally is the epitome of harmony and balance. And
Absolutely.
so how are we to bring all of that into balance if we're not talking about the masculine? And it makes me wonder, like, what sort of agendas have been infiltrated into the community, because all communities are infiltrated at some point, whether it's religion, any kind of religion, spirituality, all of that. It's always infiltrated in some way, shape, or form to take some sort of truth, twist it around, feed it back out in a different format so that people take it and lose sight of what was actually meant to be there. And
yeah, well said.
For me, one of the things I've noticed over the years of coaching, and tell me if you've noticed this, but there seems to be a lack of willingness or knowingness on how to take action from all of the truths that one's learned through their spiritual development. Like, they know how to meditate, they know how to connect, and they maybe know how to talk to their guides and all of that. But how do you take all of that wonderful development that you've used through your feminine energy and use your masculine energy to put it out into the world as, and this is, for lack of a better word, a product or an action, something that is tangible that now is being put to use. Because here's the thing, wisdom only comes when knowledge and experience marry together.
Yes.
And so the true wisdom of our journey comes when we're actually taking action as well through the experience.
Yeah. And I found that, in the last episode, we talked about how some people in the spiritual community have a hard time with monetizing on their gifts. There's a real stigma around the poverty mindset or whatever. And that ultimately is the masculine energy. It, like you said, it's taking that and creating that experience based on what you've learned and embodied through this spiritual process. And if I find that using things like white privilege and things like it's just an excuse to hold yourself back, right? And so when we're learning about meditation and we're looking in the mirror and we're sitting with what's uncomfortable, how do we release that? And how do we reconnect with what's true, without giving ourselves permission to take action, right? I personally have a really hard time when I see people let's talk about the patriots. You know, this is infiltrating not only in the spiritual community, this is coming into politics too. And it's like, I had a client one time who had a book. She really wanted to make a difference. She was so identified with her full-time job and how exhausted she was and how passionate she was about this book. And so I helped her create a marketing strategy. And then she just put the book out for free. It's so that she can continue to grind at her job because she didn't want to become a patriot. And I'm like, oh, okay. So how are we going to, you know, have this paradigm shift that we're all talking about, you know, and how do we actually practice what we preach and step into our purpose and live a life that we love if we are insisting on grinding at a job that's soul sucking so that we don't dare to capitalize on something that's spiritual.
Yeah.
I mean, that right there is perpetuating the toxic masculinity that you guys want to talk about that's holding you back. You know what I'm saying? So it's just hard to watch when I myself have, you know, hustled through the corporate life to try to make my way to my own full-time business. And it's really hard to see all of the potential that's right in front of people. And they, due to, you know, if you want to call it virtue signaling or whatever, like, oh, well, I wouldn't go there. And just so that they can seem like they're living in this type of morality that is really holding them back and keeping them small.
Yeah, it's the martyrdom complex.
Yeah, it's
And
big.
it's
It's
about,
real.
and when you're a martyr, you're sacrificing yourself, which means you don't value yourself. You don't think you are good enough to be here. However, again, another infiltration on that whole thing is that we've been programmed to believe that a martyr is of the highest regard, you know, and I mean, and I know I'm going to get a lot of like triggers when I say this, but when we look at Jesus Christ and they say Jesus Christ died for all of our sins and all of that, like, that's, to me, I don't know. I don't personally believe that's why Jesus was here. And I don't believe that's
Agreed.
why God creator sent Jesus here. I believe that Jesus was here to show us that we could do everything and more of what he could do. And that there was a capability that was available to all of us that we had forgotten. And he was here to show us that way. And it's been really through religion taken into a different context that unfortunately puts us all in a position where we feel guilty and we feel shame for valuing ourselves in a way where we make money at something that is of a good service to this world. And that's really backwards to me. And so we see this a lot in religion and spirituality, where there's been a lot of infiltration into the texts and the teachings, and things have been twisted and taken out of context. And we're all just trying to figure out the truth, right? Through our own journeys, trying to figure out the truth and connect to what is true to us. But I feel like with the focus continuing to be on the divine feminine, we're only hurting all of ourselves.
I agree.
And I would love to see more of the masculine energy being talked about, not from a gender perspective, okay? Although there are some benefits to that, because I feel like the men have been left out. You know, it's almost like the party inside's all the women, and the men are out in the rain wishing they got an invitation to the party, you know? And there is that, but more than that, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than gender. It's that all of us need to encompass that masculine energy in order to be able to live our truth. You can't just know your truth. You have to live your truth. And that comes through the execution and the connection to the sacredness of your own masculine energy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know you just did a video on the Love and Light Kool-Aid. And I think that this is a good place to kind of bring that in. And the danger of spiritual bypassing. It's, well, if it's not positive vibes only, and if it's not feel good, then I don't feel that the spiritual community has really provided the tools for themselves to face triggers within their shadow. And that's where the masculine comes in, right? So think about when you get triggered. I mean, we're all getting triggered daily right
Oh, yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And so we're getting a real-time look at who's able to handle their triggers and who has no idea what to do when they're triggered, and how everybody else is to blame, right? And I just feel so bad because those people they truly believe they're coming from a good place. And it's just, I just want to say, well, let's look within just for 5 minutes and let's just see, where we can learn, where we can grow. And I just want to take them all, because that's power that they have that's just misqualified because they've been so stuck in this like soft, love and light, feminine. And I feel that that's part of the greater agenda, is to weaken us so that we don't have that strength and that warrior power to stand up and fight when we know something's not right. Right. So if it's this narrative that's already, approved by the mainstream, and then here we ask one single question, we're automatically labeled. Well, of course you're white, you can say that, or of course you're, an ableist or classic, or it's all of these labels, when all of life is about looking within us and seeing what are we learning and how are we growing right now. And if every single person on the planet could have a personal revolution, imagine what the world would look like, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there's so much finger pointing, and that is a direct result of the imbalanced masculine and feminine.
I agree. And I just want to say, every time you say the word ableism, I giggle inside because I'm like, what is
I know. I
don't understand the word. I still don't get it.
You love how, and if you guys don't know what we're talking about, we talked about that in the last episode. Google ableism, the thing. But
all these new terminologies, just can't keep up with them. Which is part of the plan as well, so that anyway. But back to what we were just talking about, and back to what you just said. I want to make it clear that in that video, I talked about how I feel like the spiritual community, part of the light and love, which I think plays a role. I don't want to say that light and love doesn't exist, and I think I made that clear in my video. But there's a part of it that's being hijacked, and it's being used against us, instead of so that we don't become lions and we turn into lambs. Yeah. And that's also, I want to say, when Kaela and I are talking about the feminine energy, it's not that the feminine energy is weak. Absolutely not. There's so much power behind the feminine energy, especially when you're truly connected to it. That's if you're a man or you're a woman. When you're truly connected to that feminine energy, man, you can use that to explore gifts and intuitive abilities that go well beyond what most of us have experienced. Absolutely. But there's an aspect of that that's being hijacked, of the kindness and the nurturing and the compassionate energies of us, to be used against us, to hold us in a place of complacency where we won't stand up for ourselves, that we won't shift into the more masculine energy when it's being called to say, which is an outward action, to speak your truth. Okay, or take action. Standing up for yourself is an action. It's masculine. It's outward. That's all of our outward masculine energy. And we have lost a lot of our connection to it. And I have to say, looking at the way the spiritual community has grown, I blame part of that on the lack of, for whatever reason, people wanting to talk about it. And I do seem to see that it's nice. I'm glad to see there are more men creating more platforms in a spiritual nature. It makes me so happy to see the men rising up and giving their perspective, because we need to hear all of the perspectives in order to come to a deeper understanding. But I still, even like as a woman, I always wanted to understand the masculine energy as well. And I've always wanted to hear more from the men, only because we're flooded with the female perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder what your thoughts are about, because this just dropped in. I wonder if codependency is a misqualified feminine energy and narcissism is a misqualified masculine energy. Because if you think about codependency, that is caring so much about what other people think, you like completely lose yourself, right? Because everything is defined
Oh,
based on what other
100%.
people think.
Codependency is a wounded feminine energy.
And then if you think of wounded masculine, narcissism is like,
Yeah,
it's all about me. This is my world. Like, you just happen to be living in it, right? And if
absolutely.
you're going to think something different than me, then like, shame on you. And so that's a misqualified masculine energy. And that is rampant in our culture. We have literally been programmed to care way more about what other people think than ourselves. And if we care more about ourselves, then we're narcissistic, right? And so we have to reconcile with that.
Hmm. Everything's balanced. And it's interesting because within the masculine and feminine energies, just like with anything, there's a polarization where it can go into the wounded versus what I call the wild energies, the sacred energies. And
Mm-hmm.
when the feminine wounded energies are manipulation, sensitivity, what you just said, codependency, victim mentality, and men can
Right.
have this, can put this out. Men can be in their wounded
Oh,
feminine as well. This is
absolutely.
not just women.
Absolutely.
I see it all the time. But then likewise, I can see both. I've seen both women and men in their wounded masculine, where they're perpetrators or they're
Mhm.
narcissistic or they're like physically abusive or
Mhm. Emotionally abusive.
emotionally abusive. And so there's all of that. And so we have to be aware of when we're being taken out of the sacred energies, the wild energies that are very helpful, and moving into the wounded aspects, but
Mhm.
also knowing like, where are we taking more? Why are we being taken more into the feminine and not so much the masculine? And
Mhm.
to question that. Why is that?
Mhm.
Why is
Mhm.
that? Because we have to be questioning so much around us. I feel like I've never not trusted things as much as I do today in 2020. You know
Right.
what I'm
You have to be
saying? Like,
skeptical about everything.
even like the people that I really respect and I follow a lot of their work, I still question things all the time. You just
Yeah.
have to. Like, I just feel like our discernment abilities are constantly needing to be sharpened and expanded. And that's okay. You're okay. It's a good thing to question things. Healthy skepticism is important. And to also never fall into a trap, what you just talked, like the codependent trap of always relying on someone that you trust to deliver you the right information all the time. If something
Mhm.
doesn't resonate, you have to tune into that and you have to ask yourself why, um,
Yeah.
and
And
follow that.
that's the easiest tool to lead you to sovereignty, is to just tap into that inner resonance system and get to know what doesn't sit right. Like, why doesn't that sit right? And sometimes you don't have an answer, and that's okay too. Just
Yeah,
recognizing that doesn't sit right. So I'm going to explore something different and just giving that permission,
totally.
right?
And
And
it's not
that's
that you throw the
healthy
baby out with the
masculine.
bathwater, like it's
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I kind of have a rule of thumb, and like this is just my own thing, but as soon as someone starts to dip below 70% of what I'm agreeing with, I start to tend to watch less or pay attention to less.
That's fair.
Um,
There's a lot of information out right now, so that's
yeah,
probably a good thing.
yeah, 70% is around the time where I start to be like, do I really want to be putting my energy here right now? I'm not sure. And it's not that I need an echo chamber. That's not it. It's
Right.
just that
Yeah.
I'm very mindful of what's going into my mind, like just like my body and what food I put into it, what drink I put into it, I need to be discerning of the information that's going in. And it doesn't mean that I may not circle back later and tune in later or something like that, but that's just me. No one, I'm not suggesting that that's what people need to do by any means. That's just kind of what works for me.
But
um
maybe people can tap into where their threshold is,
mhm,
right? And
yeah.
see, like, where do you want to no longer waste your time? Because our values are where we spend our time, money, and energy. So if you're not valuing something as much, then just look at how much time, money, and energy you're spending in that area and shift it,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Exactly. So, what are some other ways that you've seen this, like that you've noticed from your own personal experience, that you felt like the divine feminine energy has been kind of hijacked for more nefarious purposes? Or perhaps even just without even anyone really noticing, like kind of like that subtle kind of shakedown.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that stands out that really frustrated me in the goddess group, since that's where we started, is when I was really seeking to understand the whole white privilege thing. I found that as a white person, if you agree or try to relate with an experience of someone with color, then you are absolutely kicked to the curb, like immediately, because there's no chance that you can understand or relate. And at the same time, if you ask any questions to seek to understand more so that you can do better, because when we know better, we do better, right? Then you're reprimanded for that as well, because it's not their responsibility to educate. And I really struggled with that, because I'm like, well, who am I supposed to learn from? Like, what am I, if there's such a trigger here, I am holding a container to listen, because clearly there's some energy that needs to be run, and some, you need to be heard and all of this. But even that, there was struggle within that. And well, you should already know, you should. And I just had to remove myself, because it didn't, and I saw people really feeding into that, and I would go to certain friends' pages who were white, and all of a sudden feel really bad about being white when I'm looking at their pages, and people would message me saying the same thing, like, why am I feeling bad for my skin color after following, such and such? And this started about 3-4 years ago. And it is worse. And so I'm bringing it up because it was foreshadowing to where we are today, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if we were to have spent the last 4 years learning from each other and growing together, would we be as divided as we are today? So
And
I
that,
feel that that was a real agenda
yeah.
somewhere
And I can
infiltrated.
see why you brought that into the goddess feminine energy, because the feminine energy is the silence, right? It's the void space where the masculine energy is speaking. It's the outward. So that makes sense to me. So what happened was it was taken to an unhealthy place where no one was allowed to talk to it, or I shouldn't say no one was allowed to talk about it, but it was, there was shame for even wanting to talk about it and listen. And
And that's the misqualified masculine that
yeah,
shames, right? So the feminine seeks to understand,
which is
and the wounded
logic, right? That's
masculine.
your masculine energy is about the logic. It's the mind, right?
Oh,
The feminine
okay.
energy
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
like the heart. And
Feeling. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And so if we're not able to at least have a conversation about it,
yeah,
then it's
yeah.
shut down and it's not allowed. And that's never healthy. That doesn't help anyone.
And so so think about when you're shut down, when you try to bring something up and you're shut down, what happens? Now your shadow has grown, right? Because you subconsciously realize, okay, that part of me isn't acceptable. So now that goes in your shadow, and good luck trying to bring that part out confidently, right? So when we have this shadow, it's up to us to go back into our shadow and seek those wounds and see how we can heal from those experiences, rather than just pushing them down to perpetuate them happening again, right? Because that's ultimately what will happen if we don't
Mm.
learn. So I find that the feminine is feeling something's off, and so they're really wanting to open their heart and hold a space, right? And then the wounded masculine isn't allowing for that. So now we fast forward to 2020, and how many people can have an open conversation with different perspectives? We don't have those tools. And so there's a big piece that's been missing in the personal empowerment of stepping into your divine feminine. Because think of Pele, like goddess Pele. She is just, all of the goddesses are just fierce, divine, feminine energies. But what brings that fierceness? That's their balanced masculine that gives them that confidence to show up in that way. So that empowerment piece is really lacking.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on while you're talking about that is, this is how I understand things from a conscious perspective. Okay. When we talk about our conscious awareness and conscious frequencies, I always this was probably the best, some of the best information I ever learned at like 21, 22, and I still fall back on it 20 years later. And I've got a course on it in my Alchemy Academy on the levels of consciousness, and I've got a free video on my YouTube about it too. And when you understand the level of consciousness of guilt and shame, the two lowest frequencies on the chart of consciousness. Shame is 20, it's just above death. Death is the next frequency. Okay. So after shame, it's you're gonzo, you're done. Okay. Yeah. And then guilt is, I believe it's 30. And there is anything that is trying to make us feel shame or feel guilt. I don't care what the virtue signaling is, okay? When you tap into what that frequency is, you have to ask yourself, why am I being made to feel shame? Why am I being put in a lower frequency? When you understand how frequencies are used to manipulate the masses and to keep them in a place of what is that? Deconstructive consciousness, you start to understand that those frequencies are not the frequencies of support and love and the betterment of humanity. So if something is being used that makes you feel ashamed of yourself or feel guilty for something, just remember you're being put into one of the lowest destructive levels of consciousness, and you need to ask why. What good is this doing to me? How is something that's destructive to me helpful to someone else? And you have to get really honest about that. And that's how I use it to really understand how this shit is used against us.
I love that you described it as levels of consciousness, because I don't think I brought this up in our last interview. When I was very confused at first as to why I wasn't resonating with all of these spiritual people. Like, I've been in the spiritual community for over a decade, and all of a sudden I am not seeing eye to eye. And I really struggled, and I was in my head a lot about it, so much so that I got a tumor in the back of my head. It's now removed, but that's how much in my head I was seeking to understand where this disconnect is happening. And I will never forget one night I was taking a bath, which is where I go into deepest meditation. And I was told, I have chills just thinking about it. I was told so clearly, you're at a different level of consciousness. And I remember not accepting it at first because it felt very hierarchical, and I don't really buy into that better than worse, whatever. But I sat with it. I shelved it and I sat with it. And I realized over time, the levels of consciousness are, 3D consciousness is right here, right now. Let's look at everything that's playing out and identify with that. And then 4D consciousness is more the intentions and the agendas and, more than meets the eye. And then fifth dimensional consciousness is wholeness. And I would love to hear, your perspectives here, but I see fifth dimensional consciousness as the pure wholeness of our higher selves and connecting with our sovereignty. And, so when we bring our higher self down into our fourth dimensional intentions and we align with what we can bring to this earth, that's when we can embody it in the third dimension. And so if we are so stuck on the roles and the wounds and the labels and all of that of the third dimension, it's blocking us from seeing, from piercing that veil and really seeing what's behind it. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I totally, I understand about the difficulty with like the hierarchy system. It's like, it's a very egotistical approach The ego wants to have everything in a certain level and
Exactly. Yeah.
order, and I totally get that. It's just a frequency. Okay, so we can say
Right,
the
right.
frequencies of consciousness.
Yeah. So it's not, I was just saying that was my first initial
Yeah,
thought, but
I think,
then I was able to understand what you're meaning. So I'm loving that
yeah,
you're bringing
and
it up.
here's most people who are in 3D and really of that awareness and believe that time is linear and all that need that to understand things first at that level, like they're going to need that. But if you want to kind of remove the levels part of it, and again, that's in a way, it doesn't matter if you don't see, if you don't kind of look at it as a hierarchy. I don't necessarily see it as a hierarchy. I see it
I
as a
don't
kind
think
of
it is.
experience,
Yes.
right? So,
Yes,
okay, I'm
absolutely.
experiencing guilt, and guilt is at the frequency of, say,
Yep.
30. Okay, so I'm
Yep.
I'm experiencing a frequency of 30 right now, for whatever reason, and
Mhm.
there are lessons to be learned in all of these different frequencies.
Right.
So I don't want to say one's bad, but at the same time, it is destructive to self, and it's
Yeah.
we're living in a dual world, a dual polarity world. So we're here to learn the lessons of that. So you can't ignore it and pretend it's not there.
Mhm.
But I also like, let's talk about this, because when you brought it up, it made me think of it. The idea of being in fifth dimensional consciousness, and aligning that higher self. Like, again, I've talked about this before, that ascension to me is much more of a descension process of the higher self descending into body, as opposed to us, because I just feel like ascending just means like I'm out of here.
So that's
Got
easy.
this kind of, yeah, stigma to it. And also, like, the ascending can feel like, oh, I'm getting better and better, higher and higher, and whatever. But to me, it's about unifying. Okay, and so if we're
Mhm.
unifying, it's the higher self coming into body form. So if higher self is kind of representative of 5D, okay, in some ways, we'll just use, for lack of a better like example, we'll just kind of say it right there right now as that. Do you believe, because I know this is something that's put out there in the spiritual community, I read about it and I freaking believed it for a while, and I totally bought into it, that there's no fighting, there's no war when you're in 5D.
I believe, well, I don't know how. So because I believe that it goes beyond fifth dimensional,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So we aren't at pure consciousness yet. So if we're still different strands of consciousness and we're still having our own experience, microcosm of the macrocosm, then it doesn't make sense to me that it would all be just one same frequency. So as far as, you know, war or fighting or whatever, I don't know how aggressive it is. I love that you're asking this because I haven't even contemplated it, but I can definitely see diversity for sure. What do you
Yeah,
think?
so I'm going to share this. I don't know if I've ever shared this before on my channel or on the podcast. So I have a friend who is half ET, and actually probably more ET than human. And bless him, he's got two reptilian bodyguards, and him and I have hung out a couple times. Not recently, not in the last probably year and a half or 2 years, but when I was kind of going through like the first 2 years of this awakening, I would hang out with him a couple times, and he told me that he would be going into battle when a lot of times he'd go to sleep and his consciousness would leave his body, and he would be taken onto ships. He was a pilot, and for lack of a better word, and he'd be used to go and to kill other beings. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you mean you're killing other beings? Like, that doesn't happen in the higher dimensions. Like, that's not that's not love, light and love, and
Okay.
I was totally, it was really hard for me to even like
Switch.
hear it. I'm like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense to me. That's not what I've been learning through everything. Like, you hear about the angelic realm and all of this kind of stuff. And so, but I am of like, if something comes in that it's triggering me and I don't understand it and it doesn't make sense, there's something there to be learned. Like maybe I'm not seeing something, right? And so through my own understanding of talking to other friends of mine who, I have another friend who's pretty much like a mentor to me. He's very, very, very psychic, remote views, has had access to very high level government stuff and friends, like this stuff that I am told blows my mind. And I can't talk about a lot of it on this show. But he also has, he's told me I had these reptilians that were like bothering me, constantly causing problems in my life. And so finally, like I traveled, consciously, went to the reptilian's planet home and killed him in front of his family. And I'm like,
oh my God, that's badass.
And the part of me that's just like all light and love,
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, but at the same time, I see now how we've been programmed, and I know that this is going to be very difficult for people to hear on this channel. And I'm sure there are people who get it, but and for people that don't and really don't like resonate with this, please don't take it on. Like, don't. Like, it's not.
Yeah,
that's okay. I'm okay with this. This is what I've understood through my own really trying to look at things and understand things. And the way I saw it is, I understood. I'm like, if you don't stand up for yourself, you are prey every single time. And part of the problem that's been infiltrated through the community, spiritual community especially, since that's what we're talking about, and that it's the focus on the divine feminine, is not recognizing there may be a time where you're going to have to pick up your sword and use it in a way that may be uncomfortable for you, but it's a matter of life or death. And will you do that? Will you defend yourself? Or do you not believe that you're worth defending? That you don't have more work still to do on this planet, more good to bring? And if someone were to take your life, like at this point, we're kind of taught that you don't stand up for yourself when you just, the only way to fight evil is just through like heart vibrations or something, and I'm not going to sit here and say have it all figured out, because I don't. But I'm playing with these ideas and I'm trying to understand them more. And I'm trying to like really understand where has the indoctrination been and where is the truth. And I'm just trying to find the truth. And so I have to ask these questions and I have to look at them in different ways than I've looked at them before. And the way that I was looking at it was from that light and love. Only if I can meditate it away, kind of.
That's spiritual bypassing,
yeah.
And it's making us weaker. And I hosted a live summit a few years ago called Cosmic Immersion, the Galactic Path to Sovereignty. And every single person that I interviewed during that course, I asked them how they tapped into their ET guides, because it was all galactic. Every single one of them said the more grounded they became, the clearer their connection became. Because a lot of us, when we meditate, when we, empower our chakras, it's so easy for us to dissociate. And really the way that we can communicate and connect with these other beings is when we're in this body, because they're there and they want to communicate with us here so we can be the ambassadors in this body, right? That being said, one person I interviewed, she talked a lot about as above, so below. So you look at all of the war that's happening here, the psychological warfare, the information warfare, all of the division between the
spiritual warfare.
I don't know enough to be preaching about it, but there are galactic wars to my understanding. The Syrian wars, Orion wars, Lyran wars, all of those wars that we are vibrationally picking up on. I mean, how can we not pick up on that? And if time and space is a spiral, going back to the frequency not being hierarchical, it's a spiral.
Yeah.
So we're going to spiral through all different frequencies. And I have also come to realize that when we're channeling and you're taught to channel and you're taught or you're inspired to go to a channeler, you need to be crystal clear on who you're channeling and who they're channeling, because there are a lot of beings that we can't see that can come into our consciousness that we don't even realize if we haven't built up that sovereign strength, right? To know who we are.
And I love that you called it sovereign strength, because, you know, this has actually come up in some of my sessions with people, and I've been helping them understand that, you know, it's not about protecting yourself from other entities and all of that, although it can be. But if you constantly go in with that mindset, then you're always putting out that you're being attacked, and you don't want to be in that vibration, right? So that you called it sovereign strength. What I say is just focus on making your energy stronger.
Yes.
And bigger.
They can't fuck with you. If you're so strong, you're not at a frequency they can fuck with. But if you're like shielding in a bubble and prepping for war against your soul, then you are primed for the taking. You know
it's like any women's self-defense class, you know, from what I've heard is that, you know, they always teach you, if you're walking down a street, walk with confidence, with purpose, with your head held high, so that you could, because perpetrators look for someone who's easy prey. And if you look like you're someone who's going to fight back, they're not going to bother you. So
absolutely.
It's important to know that I'm not for war. Okay. I'm not, I hope that that's not what's coming across to my audience.
Not at all.
I'm not advocating for war by any means, but when push comes to shove, if someone's coming at me, you better know I'm coming for you. Because if it's a difference between me or you, I'm going to choose me. It's just
absolutely. And I have a friend who is a very high vibes only person, and she's a business owner, and she's very strong. And she has a really hard time confronting people. And I told her one time, I said, look, if you ever have anything to say to me, like, I give you permission right now to say it to my face. I don't want you to ever feel like you can't confront me, because I'm a straight shooter and I expect that back, right? And she was like, you know, the one thing about you, and I was like, ooh, what's she gonna say? And she goes, and we did some work together, and she goes, you always have your own back. And I'm like, how is that an insult? Like, thank you. And it was very interesting that she struggled with that piece of me, because I love this person to death, and she also surrounds herself with yes people, right?
Yeah.
So if you're someone who's willing to say no, you're not the first person that she chooses to have in her life. And I'm someone who will say no if it's not a resonance, or, you know, I have healthy boundaries. And so it was just interesting, and I'll never forget that coming up as the one thing that bothered her about me. And if I was in a more insecure place in my life, I would have really spun out on that. But because I worked so hard to get to that place, I'm like, well, thank you, you know. And it did turn out that I had to have my own back with her. So, you know, but it's very, very important to, like you said, build that. I have a sword tattoo right there, sword of light, because, you know, and I'm not super religious or anything, but I know in the Bible, they talk about you come with a sword of strength, and that is to, you know, defend what you know is right and not be vulnerable prey. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, we all want to be stronger. And it's not selfish to want to be stronger. It's actually inspiring to want to be stronger, because you seeking out your own sovereign strength, you're going to inspire the next person, whether they know what they're inspired by or not. They're going to see something in you that they recognize and they're drawn to. And guess what? It's the strength within them that is calling them forth, right? So we're all being called in this spiritual war that we're all experiencing to tap into what's true for us. And going back to when we're feeling shame or when we're feeling guilt, where is that coming from? Is that coming from you, or is it coming from something outside of you that's trying to influence your experience? And having that discernment and that awareness is going to shift your timeline, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Your awareness can absolutely shift your timeline. And then if you were to take action from that, you shift it even further. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah, it's interesting. This has been a really good conversation. I really enjoyed this
Yeah.
because I, I really believe, and I'm curious for anyone who's in the audience, you know, like who's watching this on us on YouTube with us right now too, or anyone who just wants to leave comments below the video, uh, or even write me in. You know, I'm curious what your thoughts are on it. But it's always felt to me like, has the emphasis been on the divine feminine energy more than it should have been, okay, in a sense of being able to find balance, and a total like disregard for the masculine energy, to what we're kind of seeing in our world of like the feminist movement and masculine toxicity. I can't even say
Toxic masculinity.
toxic masculinity, that's what it is. Yeah. um
Whatever it is,
you
I
know,
totally get it.
is that a byproduct of that whole like and when I talk about the feminist movement, I mean like third wave feminist movement. I don't mean like the original roots of it, of where it was,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
like of where it was in its purest form. I'm talking about when CIA hijacked it, and you know, and all of that, and where it's been now, where it's just become about man hating. And
Yeah.
then of course the toxic masculinity has the emphasis on the divine feminine energy and the goddess energy in our community, overemphasis and lack of emphasis on the masculine, a result of that? Has that been an infiltration of that energy in our community? Like, that's what I'm curious to know, if anyone, what their thoughts are on that in the comments, because that's how I've been kind of perceiving it. And it doesn't just do the men harm, it does all of us harm, because I would love to see more people who have really connected with that, with their feminine energy, and gained a lot of knowledge, has connected and started to do a lot of the healing, you know, the healing work and the nurturing and everything that you've had to do, whether it's working with your inner child or going into past lives or going into just previous parts of your life, to collect all the fractal parts of you and bring them more back into union. How do you then take all of that and put it into action in a way that serves this world? Because we're really being called to that right now. There is such a huge call to action at this time, and action is our masculine energy.
Yeah, there really is. Yes. And something that's coming through that I want to say before we sign off is how rampant the need for dismantling the patriarchy has been within the goddess spiritual community. And I wonder if that has been part of the leading into socialism. Because if you think about in my experience, they've been really pissed off about capitalism, right? Like, that's the patriarchy, is this like this
Yeah,
evil capitalism,
it's so
right?
misunderstood. Like, you know,
It's so misunderstood.
what people don't realize
Um,
is when they think they hate capitalism, what they're really hating is corporatism.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So anybody who I told this 19-year-old, I'm like, well, you told me that you want to be an astrologer. And she's like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, that's capitalizing on your gifts. So that's it doesn't have to be evil, right? And so I wonder how much of that dismantling the patriarchy has fed into the you know, what you said, anti-corporate, but we're losing the middle class as we speak. We're watching it dissolve.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because we would be the middle class if we had the strength and the confidence to step into creating our own monetized reality, right? Instead of grinding for a job that we don't love. And so I don't know. I think that there's something to that ideology that has infiltrated and kind of added to where we
And
are now.
I think it's important to note too that, why do we have to dismantle the patriarchy or the matriarchy? Why can't they work in union together? Like, I'm sure there are strengths to the patriarchy as well as there are to the matriarchy. and what if we were to utilize all of the wonderful aspects of that, together? And I don't believe that we should be dismantling either.
Absolutely. And think about the power of the moms who are waking up to the child trafficking, the moms who have vaccine injured children. That is power in the feminine, right? And those are females who are allowing for their masculinity to come through and marry their passion, right?
Yeah.
So
I just got
there
chills
is a
when you
lot
said
of power in the feminine, but we have to embody our masculine. And it's not gender. It's all energetic.
Yeah, it is all energetic, and it's so important. And I just, that is why it's kind of, I don't want to say it's sad to see, because I get that it's part of our journey. This is part of the journey. This is what we all signed up for. I guess it's a little disheartening when, like, for instance, when I'm working with people, or even just people in the audience, and they're stuck and they don't know where their purpose is, or they don't know what to do, or they're not sure how to take action. And I see so much potential there, so much potential in each of these people of what they're capable of, but they're so scared to activate the masculine energy. And oh my gosh, I just think about how incredibly further along we would be, and that's okay. That's not where we are right now. This is the timeline we're all in. I'm not judging it, but just when you kind of like get this vision of understanding where things could be, if we were all able to start moving through the fear, through taking action of the masculine energy. And I posted this on my my alchemy group, because I saw it, Above Duality posted it on their Instagram, and I hijacked it and put it in my alchemy group. But it was a Rumi quote, and it's like, it's basically, when you finally get on the path reveals itself to you, like the way is shown to you.
Yeah.
So it's not until you actually start taking action. And this is where I feel like there's a big disservice being done, in a sense of what people understand, that you're not going to find your purpose in meditation. You're just not. No. You may get glimpses of it. You may get an understanding of what it might be, or at least some ideas. But until you start taking action, until you start using your masculine energy to start taking action, it's not going to become clear. Because what is masculine energy? Clarity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you want to go to the chakras that we talked about in the last episode, that second chakra is that feminine creativity, and that third chakra is that confidence. So there's the feminine and masculine right there. And so if you're rooted and you feel safe in life, you're more likely to have that feminine creativity, come to life, and not necessarily compare with anybody else, because it just is. And then your confidence aligns with that, and then your heart sets boundaries around it, and then you have the confidence to speak to it and follow through with what you see in meditation. Because meditation is going to give you that feeling. It's going to give you those ideas, but it's up to you to take action and believe in yourself. And that circles back to shadow work. So if at any point in your life you have felt that it was unacceptable, inappropriate, shunned, whatever, it's up to you to reconcile that, situation, or heal that inner wound or whatever. And, hit up a coach or call Nicole or somebody to help you really navigate those spaces that you feel so vulnerable in, so that you can find wholeness again, because that wholeness will allow for your masculine to feel safe in taking action.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. And I think that's the whole thing, is like, you really hit it on the nail there when you said, you may see what you need to do in your meditations, but until you actually do it, like it's not going to
really
happen.
Frustrated.
You've got to be the one to put it into action. That's why you're an avatar.
Nobody's going to come around and save you, and that's a lesson that a lot of us are having to really learn, is we are here to save ourselves.
Yeah. And I've been there. I don't want to pretend like I haven't been in that part of the journey. I've been there where I thought, well, maybe it'll just happen, or it's not happening for a reason right now. It's not the right time. Divine timing. we'll make it happen. And it's just like, ooh, another spiritual lies there that, like, not that there isn't divine timing and all of that kind of stuff, but don't use as an excuse as to why you're not having your life turn out the way it is. It's because you're not taking action.
Or a marketing plan. I can't tell you how many times people are like, well, clients who are meant to be mine will come to me. How do they know about you? Like, how do they know that you're the one for them? Well, the universe will send them to me.
And there is a level of truth to that. I don't want to deny, because it's definitely happened, but it doesn't happen on its own. It happens in
you have to put yourself out there for it to magnetize. You have to take action for it to magnetize. I mean, that's a lot of attraction.
Yeah.
But what are you attracting and from where?
Exactly. And so basically through your action, you're basically saying to yourself, I believe in me, and I'm going to do it. And so the universe is like, oh, someone believes in themselves. Let's back them up a little bit,
I mean, would you agree that pretty much each of us are learning how to embody our self-worth in this life? Do you know of a single person that is not having to really accept and understand their personal self-worth? Mm-hmm. It's the secret ingredient, because when we know we're worthy and we stop making excuses for why we're not worthy, we might actually experience everything we ever dreamed of, and like you, I've definitely seen peaks and valleys of this journey myself. So that's why I think we can speak to it, is because we have been there.
Yeah.
We can recognize it.
And when I wasn't taking action, it's just because I was scared.
Exactly. 100%.
I was scared of failing. I was scared of being judged. I was scared of success. I was scared, it's just fear.
Scared of the pressure of so many people depending on you. For me, that's one of the fears, is like, I've had the overwhelming DMs, and I've had the and so success is scary sometimes, so look at all of the fears. And sometimes they're not irrational. Sometimes you're afraid of the very thing that you want,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. Tell my audience again where they can reach you and find out more information about you.
Yeah, so if you go to CosmicKaela.com, KOZMICKAELA.com, I'm sure you'll put it in the notes, that will show you all of the services on how we can work together, and I can support you on embodying your sovereign strength. And then InspiringSovereignty.com will just send you to everything. It's kind of a hold me over website. So it'll send you to my YouTube, my Twitter, my Instagram, and my YouTube has a free course. It's less than 60 minutes from start to finish, and it's going to take you through each chakra, just helping you explore and ask critical questions as to where you might be holding yourself back, or where you might be still hanging out in that shadow, or just really validate where you are truly empowered, and just kind of pat you on the back and give you props for all the work that you've been doing on this journey.
Perfect. Well, I'm definitely going to leave all of those links in the description. And thank you so much, Kaela, for coming back on the show.
Nicole. So great to be with you again.
Yeah, I think it's, sometimes we got to have these topics that are a little bit uncomfortable and a little hard to hear. And again, trust me, I know I said some things that probably a lot of people are going to be like, ooh, Nicole might be losing it. No. And that's okay. I'm okay with that, because I'm just speaking on my own journey of what I'm trying to understand and all of that. And that's what this whole process is about,
Well, you're leading by demonstration that we can each have a different perspective, and we can hold space for each other, and it can all be real at once, right? Yeah. Just because something's true for you doesn't mean that it threatens what might be true for me.
Yeah.
So if we can walk away with that understanding, then we're far along.
We are. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for being here again. We will be with you again back next week. All right, guys, have a wonderful night, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening and being such a supportive audience. All video episodes can now be found on my personal YouTube channel, Nicole Frolick. If you would like to further support the show, you can visit my merchandise shop or send any donations to the PayPal link in the description below. Remember, a mind is like a parachute. Unless it's open, it's useless. So keep joining me each week as I continue to expand the mind and explore life beyond this reality.